finally, I am going to turn this over to Seal Garrett, who is a board member of WAVE and the executive director of At Home Alexandria, to introduce our plenary. Again, thank you to our winners. We appreciate you all.
Indeed. Good morning, everybody. Here is what we're going to try to do here. I just wanted to say how this session came about. We were finding that in small groups, a lot of village leaders would be asking questions. How do you handle this? How do you handle payroll? What is does your treasurer review financial processes? If you ask 20 different villages how they handle them, you'll get 20 different answers. And it's just, the role of the treasurer is so different among villages. Depending on your level of maturity, you're always having to reevaluate. Is it time for me to maybe hire some professional support with my bookkeeping practices? It changes so quickly as we mature as villages. And we thought, well, maybe it's not the sexiest topic in the world. It was time to get real and talk to one another about how do you handle this? How do you handle that? Because we all have very limited budgets. We have limited time, limited people to do the work, yet nonprofits more and more have to adhere to financial accounting practices, and those prices aren't going down. So what we're going to do here is we have three panelists who I'm going to introduce in just a second. And we're going to have each of those panelists speak for about 10 minutes, talk about their own perspective and when they knew or how they know when they need to change things up a bit. And then we will, after each panelist, we'll have about 5 minutes for questions to that panelist. If we're lucky, at the end of having each of our panelists present and answer some questions, maybe we'll have a little bit of time for general questions after that. But anyway, hopefully that'll give us all a sense of which breakout room you might like to go to. And I know we did ask that up front. Jonas, I might need your help if someone needs to switch to a different breakout room, but I think we'll get that all settled. Each of these facilitators will be leading a breakout as well. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our three panelists, and then we don't have any slides after that, so then you can take that slide down, Jonas. But our first panelist is Ross Hammery, the treasurer for Mount Pleasant Village in DC. He'll speak first, and then Ava Lucero, who is the executive director for DuPont Circle Village, will speak. And then Elaine Vaughn, who is the financial operations associate with Supporting Strategies, which is a nationwide bookkeeping service. They operate in a number of states, including Virginia, and that's how we happen to know about them. They each offer a different perspective, and I think you'll appreciate why we've asked each of them to weigh in on some of these issues today. And this is going to be interactive, people. So get your coffee, get your brain on, ask those questions. This is the time. All right. So hold on a second. I've got too many little pop-up things going on my screen. Ross, there you are, right next to me on my screen. Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you and start us off. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Celie. I'm the treasurer of Mount Pleasant Village. We're a mid-sized village, I would say. We have about 210 members. Our budget's this year's about $75,000. Of that, we get about we figure we get about $20,000 from our member fees, which are $50, $10,000 from our member fees, which are $50 a member. We get about $50,000 from the DC government grant, and the others we make up with individual donations and some small foundation grants. We basically have no salaried staff. We use contractors as needed. We have one and then maybe 1.5 contractors that we use on a recurring basis. One is an intern. So we're very heavily reliant on our membership and basically our committee chairs. We have a committee structure. We work on developing our budget through the committee structure. The finance committee, which I chair, runs estimates of what the annual budget will be starting about September of every year, or for the coming year. We work that through our committees to formulate a budget. We go through several rounds of aggregating committees' requests, reviewing them in the finance committee, sending it back to the committees for their review, and then finally reaching a consensus among the finance committee, which I chair, and which includes our president. And then we pass that by the board. We also have several reviews during the course of the year as things change, so that we can actually begin some adjustment to committee budgets. Again, since we're a volunteer organization, we have sometimes relatively dramatic shifts in what we expect to spend, or in what is actually, I should correct that and say, what is actually being spent versus what was anticipated. And with a small budget, we feel we need to be pretty nimble with that. So we go through some periodic and even ad hoc reviews, report back to the board. The board gives us pretty good latitude in making adjustments mid-course as we need to, and then just keeping them advised as things. We have, again, a fairly simple budget. We have just one bank account, a business account, a savings account where we keep a small amount in reserve, which we probably don't even need to bother with. My job is basically as the treasurer, basically handles everything with finances. We have a bookkeeper that what we use that service for is monthly. At the end of every month, I download our bank account with all our checking account with all our financial transactions onto a spreadsheet. I code every transaction, and then I send that via email to our bookkeeper. She puts that on to QuickBooks and then sends me a monthly report back. We run our bookkeeping costs are very low. Actually, I think they run about 125 to 150 a month, depending on what kind of special requests we'll make for some, information. So what we've done is, and really kind of evolved over this last couple of years since I've been the treasurer, is we've gone away from checks almost completely. We've tried to put everything on automatic payment that we can. We make extensive use of the Zelle function, which is the way that almost every major bank allows transfers between accounts. It's relatively simple, but it makes it a lot easier for us to balance our books at the end of every, to keep up with our payments. We had, particularly at the start of the pandemic, we were pretty much check reliant, had some real difficulties with people receiving checks in any kind of reasonable amount of time, not having the checks clear in time for us to provide the reports to the Foggy Bottom Village, which handles the DACL grant, the DC grant, and provides the checks from that. So again, we've gone to a lot of the internet banking, which has really helped us quite a bit, and actually helped me quite a bit. As I mentioned, I'm handling all the grant submissions for payment. What we've tried to do is get our committee chairs and everyone cognizant of the fact that we need to close things out at the end of every month. They've become pretty responsive to that. We use email a lot. I have them send the receipts to me for any expenditures on email so I can actually match those up against the payments, and reconcile things every month. I'm almost at my 10 minutes here, so let me figure out the other things. Okay, the other thing that again, we pretty much in our organization's relatively small. We don't have a huge budget. We don't have a lot of contractors. I handled issuing the 1099s every year and also handle the income tax reporting. Up to now, it's been we've been able to use the short form. I mean, not even the short form, the card. This is our first year we'll use the 1099 EZ, and I'm kind of working my way through that process as we talk. So I think that the other thing, I guess, just as a way of background for me personally, I was a senior executive with the feds. I don't have any budget background aside from the fact that I ran a fairly large organization, and we used our budget as one of our primary management tools, but I always had a staff that handled the bookkeeping, the accounting, other kinds of things. So I understand budgeting, but I am not an accountant. I would strongly recommend anybody that takes the treasurer's job have good computer skills. I am kind of weak on my computer skills. I'm good with email and things like that, but I have to confess I rely on my son-in-law and my daughter, who live a couple blocks away, to help me out with Excel spreadsheet issues and things like that. So I think if you're going to have a volunteer treasurer, that is one of the things I'd look for. I'd encourage those that are applying to having their skill set. The only other skill set I think is kind of needed is, again, in our village, we do a lot of work with the committee chairs. They're volunteers. They're the ones that are actually making the commitments and spending the money, and being able to set up a dialogue with them to where you have a trust basis, so they'll let you know what they're doing and provide you with the receipts and all of that. So there's not surprises or anything as we work through, is kind of a good thing to have. So I think I've killed my 10 minutes easily.
Well, we've got a little bit of time, Ross. If anyone has any questions for Ross, we've got about 5 minutes here. I always find it interesting to ask a treasurer how much time they're spending on that job. We're going through in our own village, we have a treasurer who's fantastic, and her job has grown, as they all do during her tenure. And at the end of this year, we will need to move to another treasurer. We're still trying to find a good treasurer, but they always want to know what's involved. So Ross, share, if you would, about how much of your time each week you're spending in this volunteer role.
It varies. I would say probably on average about 8 hours a week. It varies depending on where we are in a budget cycle. Sure. If we're formulating it, of course, you need to put more. You need to put a little more time when you prep for a board meeting, which we have quarterly. But it's now that I've gotten into a rhythm after several years and have the discipline to kind of close things out as we go along rather than letting things pile up. It's about 8. And I think it will vary depending on what kind of systems people have in place. The more automated you are, the less time you're going to spend trying to, reconcile things or review notes and aggregate information to do your reporting. So.
Any other tips you could offer about how to do that automation? What did you?
Well, I'm trying to figure it out right now.
Yeah.
Actually, because my term ends, or I'm not going to renew at the end of this fiscal year, which is ends in December. And so I'm in the process of working through all the stuff that I do and seeing how we can automate it to some point. My daughters that are Excel experts tell me this is a pretty easy process. But I haven't had the guts to go through it with them yet. So hopefully it will turn out as they say.
Great. Thank you. Any other questions for Ross? It's a challenge when you are an all-volunteer village trying to keep it in line and keep it in order. And I'm kind of fascinated by the committee approach to the budgeting process. That would be a challenge for my group. That's great. Well, I guess we can move on to Ava. Ava represents a village that has matured and grown quite a lot in recent years, and they've had to change things up in their own internal world to keep things manageable. Of course, once you get into the grants world, your financial requirements take a big, huge leap upward. So Ava, talk a little bit about the growing pains and when you knew you had to like change it up and kind of how you work through your own process.
Sure, I'm very happy to. I want to thank you, Seal, for coming up actually with this program. After listening to Ross, I do realize we were in that exact situation, all of the things he mentioned at one point, until we did have a huge growth spurt. And so I love that there's a huge contrast between our two villages, and I think that is a good idea to have this program. Anyway, good morning, everybody. My name is Ava Lucero. I am the director of DuPont Circle Village in Washington. It's commonly known as DCV. We are one of the larger villages. We were incorporated in 2008. Today we have a membership of about 260, a staff of 3. I'm full-time and I have 2 half-time employees. We have a board of 14, numerous committees, and our annual budget is a little over $350,000. There have been several drivers behind DCV's growth, but today I'm going to highlight our financial management and the best practices that we've instituted, which I believe are foundational to successfully managing the growth. So prior to 2017, DCV was like most villages. We relied on a volunteer treasurer to maintain our day-to-day financial needs, such as manual check writing, a very simple payroll, budgeting, and reports that were generated using an old Excel sheet. But at the end of 2017, a confluence of events caused us to shift our financial management structure entirely. That December, our longtime beloved treasurer passed away along with our financial history in her own memory and the know-how. So at that time as well, DCV also received a very substantial bequest. And right around that time as well, I became the financial guardian for 2 major grants. One was a foundation and one was the very first government grant we got from the DC government. And both of these grants involved other DC villages. So my task was then to, in order to be responsible for those grants, I had to do all the financial reporting monthly and pay out and make sure all documentation was in place. And we did not have any kind of structure in place. Fortunately for us, at that same time, our new board president had a very strong financial background. And with his guidance and the support of our finance committee, we set forth a plan to adopt best practices for full transparency and financial compliance. So the first thing we did is we hired a professional bookkeeper who immediately jumped in, started gathering all of the financial information that was available, all the materials that had been
I'm trying to figure out if my internet is unstable or is anybody else seeing that Ava has frozen?
It's
Mine's
frozen.
Ava.
I'm having the same
Okay.
problem.
It's everyone.
Okay, got it. So do we think it would help if we took our videos off? Does that work?
I think it's on Ava's end. Perhaps we
Okay.
go on to the third panelist. We can come back to Ava if she comes back in a second. Oh, she just left entirely.
Okay, okay.
Can we let them know in the chat room, maybe? They may not know.
I have a phone number for Ava and I will call her.
Thank you.
All right. Shall we go on to her? I hate to cut her off in mid-sentence here, but shall we wait a minute for Ava or go on to our?
She might have just stepped off to re-enter, and that sometimes corrects the problem.
Yeah,
So
let's
maybe
give
we
her a
could just
minute.
wait a
She's kind of
second.
right in the middle of it. If you guys will, thank you for your forbearance. There was sort of a method to this, to the sequence. All right.
Well, as you all know, I'm usually
I
the
don't like
guilty
my
party,
face so big on the screen.
right?
It's a good face.
Gallery view, everybody.
Well, I am going to try and see if I can.
I thought it was interesting about how they realized that they needed to change their systems with the loss of the accountant, with their treasurer. And so one of the things for me, when I was involved with a village, was to ensure that somebody else had the password to the accounts and that was updated. That's just not good. I mean, that's good throughout our lives, personally and professionally.
Right.
Excuse me.
So part of this is, I feel like my own village relies so much on our treasurer. And that's kind of what I want to get out of this, is how do we not have that situation? Except I don't want to have more work to do, but it is really, it's a challenge to have a certain level of control without being buried in the work. And so that is a very interesting example that she brought up what happened.
Well, and the other part of that is that the processes should be documented. So the people dealing with finances should be recording the steps of what they do and where to find the important information and passwords so that someone else could step in. And the other thing is to have a backup who may look at it periodically, or who's going to be the treasurer next year. Let them start working with the treasurer this year for a month or two to get a little familiarity.
Like
That's
those all
what
sound
our
like great
village did.
ideas. How many of us are doing that?
That's what our village did. We have everyone who was an officer, from our executive director, board president, secretary, and treasurer, wrote a 1 or 2 page document on their duties. And I, as the initial treasurer, I did mine mostly on a monthly basis to let people know what was expected. And I put on passwords and accounts and names of accounts. And that is a document that our executive director keeps, and it's passed on to the next treasurer. So it's the if you were hit by a bus, what would happen type of document.
That's a great idea.
Seal, I think
Okay.
we should go to Elaine Vaughn.
All right. So Ava's not back on yet. Well,
I'm not
shoot.
seeing her.
Okay. Well, that's what we'll do. Ava's got a lot of great things to say, so I hope she gets back on soon, but we'll go ahead and move on to Elaine. Elaine, thanks so much for joining this motley crew. Elaine has her own interesting background. Please take a minute to tell folks about it, that she's been in the world of supporting seniors for some time, but she is now part of the supporting strategies team, and she can talk about what we really do need to have in place on the topic that we were just talking about. And if something does happen to your treasurer and you are reliant on one person, and that's a trap we could all get into, I suppose. So yeah, go ahead, Elaine.
Morning, everybody. It's certainly a pleasure to be here with you today. As Celie mentioned, I have spent the last 15 plus years in the not-for-profit world and 10 years in senior living. I was the controller for a pretty sizable CCRC in Pompano Beach, Florida for 10 years. So my heart is really with working with seniors and the not-for-profit world. And I'm really delighted to be an associate with supporting strategies, where I can use my passion for the not-for-profit world to help small agencies like yours, perhaps in the future. The reason that I've been invited is really to kind of talk about what the best practices are for agencies. And Ross mentioned budgeting. It doesn't matter how big or how small you are. Every agency needs to prepare a budget and monitor it. We have a saying, margin equals mission. So by creating that budget and making sure it's a realistic budget, you know where you are, monitoring it monthly, you know if something's not working right, and keeping your financial statements current, you'll be able to function very nimbly and make adjustments and tweaks, on a very current basis. So budget and monitoring are really, really important. The second is keeping your records and documentations tight. You need to keep all of your receipts and invoices and make sure that, obviously they match to your disbursements. When you are preparing disbursements, you need to have a separation of duties where somebody is presenting the invoice for payment and somebody else is approving that. So, if you're writing the check, make sure somebody else in your organization is looking at it, because fraud is unfortunately very common in the not-for-profit world, and especially in the small not-for-profits. So by having that system of checks and balances and keeping it very simple, you'll help ensure the ongoing financial integrity of your record keeping and documentation. Some of you are not processing payrolls yet. You don't have employees, so you're using contractors to help support your operations. One recommendation that we have as a best practice is if you get a new independent contractor, make sure you get their W-9 before you give them their first payment. Because as soon as they're paid, they can ghost you. And it sounds silly, but they want to get paid. You need your documentation, so make sure you get it before you ever do that first disbursement. Reconcile your accounts monthly. You're probably only going to have a couple of accounts: your banking checking account, your savings account. Maybe you've got a credit card that you're using for expenses, but make sure you're tying those into your accounting records each and every month, and then prepare your financial statements and review them monthly. To the extent that you can, automate your systems. I know technology has really started moving very fast, especially with the onset of the pandemic. Ross is working on figuring out the best way to automate his agency as he's looking forward to transitioning out. QuickBooks Online is used by many, many small not-for-profits. And there's a company called TechSoup. If you're not familiar with it, check it out, because they offer some substantially discounted pricing on software, especially QuickBooks Online. We do recommend that you use a cloud-based accounting system if you're going to have one, because that way there's more than one person that will always have access to it. If somebody's got the software on their computer at home and they're doing the books, nobody else has access to it. The bookkeeper with the desktop version has got to download and export and print and email, and maybe the executive director wants to go in and look at the financial statements and not wait. So we always recommend that if you are going to get an accounting package, that you move to the online cloud-based solutions. For accounts payable, I know that many of you are using Zelle and paying out of your bank account, which is great. There's also another software that is called Bill.com, and that feeds directly into QuickBooks if you should choose to start bringing more of these functions in-house. Bill.com is really seamless in that you can enter your bill, somebody else, and here's your segregation of duties and your internal controls, somebody else has to approve that payment before it can go out. Once that payment is approved, you're done. You don't have to write the check. You don't have to put it in an envelope. You don't have to put a stamp on it. It goes out and it feeds into your general ledger. It's really a very seamless integration into your QuickBooks. And anytime you have that seamless integration, you've got better accuracy and you've got more time available to work on your mission. Some of you now are employing people, and payroll becomes a place where many small not-for-profits have that dividing line of where you're going to start using a bookkeeper versus letting your treasurer do it. And payroll becomes a liability for every director and every officer of your agency. So we always recommend that if you are going to be processing payroll, that you're going to use a third-party payroll provider, which will provide a complete package that includes impounding the payroll taxes and filing your payroll tax returns. Again, what that does is it takes the liability off of the officers and the directors and makes sure that you are in full compliance with the government with respect to your payroll taxes. Because I will share with you that if something goes sideways and you don't pay, for some reason those payroll taxes don't get remitted, the IRS will go after the officers and directors, and they will have to pay out of their own pockets. I have seen that happen in real life. So it's really important for you to understand the importance of that as you start to bring employees into your organization. Cost allocations are something that I'd like to talk about in the breakout sessions. For those of you who won't be going to the breakout session, my biggest piece of advice is keep it simple. And typically, when I'm doing an allocation process, I do it once a year at budget time, develop the driver, do a time study, whatever your basis of allocation is going to be, and I use it for the entire budget year. People get very intimidated by it, and I think it's really more the thought of it than actually doing it once you develop that routine. For year end, all this good record keeping that you're doing during the year makes your year end process simple. If you reconcile your books every month, you're not going to have big issues at year end when you're working with your outside accountants. I don't know how many of you are actually preparing a 990 EZ or the full form 990. I know Ross talked about sending in the card. The 990s have a Schedule O. And Schedule O is where you get to tell your story. And I can't emphasize enough how important it is for you guys to share the great work that you are doing on this Schedule O every year. If you're going for a grant or funding and you're small, you don't have an audited financial statement, the people that are looking at funding you are going to go to GuideStar and they're going to pull up their 990. And if you can share your story on that Schedule O, they're going to see what great work that you're doing. And it's really free advertising. So I encourage you all to use that as an opportunity every year when you file that 990 to tell your story and make yourself so attractive. People want to start throwing money at you. At year end, how do you know if you want an audit or a review? That is really a function of who your end user is going to be. I would say that the smaller agencies really aren't going to need the level of an audit, unless you are getting government grants, or perhaps you've got a foundation funder that is wanting you to get an audit. You're not going to need that scope. The real difference is the amount of assurance that the CPA firm is going to put on your financial statements. For a review, they basically take your numbers, they look at them analytically, they might ask you a few questions, and then they give them back to you with their cover on it. For an audit, they're going to assume more responsibility. They're going to come in, they're going to look at your internal controls. They're going to tie down most of the balance sheet accounts, look at the financial statements analytically, probably reconcile payroll. It's a much more extensive process, which is why an audit is typically 2 times the cost of doing a review. It's a major expense for an agency with a very small budget. So, if you find yourself in that position, talk to your CPA firm, figure out who's asking you for the audit before you just go and say, okay, I guess we have to do an audit, because maybe you don't need to have that full scope. As Ava was starting to talk about, she gave me a lovely segue about using a professional bookkeeping services firm. That's what we do. And we can work with very small agencies up to very large agencies because we have the industry experience and we can help you put systems in place. We have efficiencies already built into our systems because we have the automation. We can help you maintain all the required documentation to really seamlessly integrate everything into your bookkeeping system. We make sure that the monthly account reconciliations are done and clean before we give you your financial statements at the end of the month. We can help you understand, because many people that are working and volunteering in the agencies really don't have a strong financial background. So we can help you understand what that means in very simple and plain language. We have a network of trusted advisors that we can share with you, so you don't have to go out and find somebody on the street to help you implement a retirement plan or an IRA to run through your payroll. And, you know, we do the work basically so you can focus on your mission. So that would be the benefit of having professional bookkeeping services when you get to that point in your growth where you really feel like you need to make that next step.
Fantastic. Thank you, Elaine. Thank you for jumping in a little faster. Ava's back with us. Ava, so sorry. Power outages, you never can predict them. But I think in the interest of time, why don't we, well, first, let's take 2 minutes. If anybody wants to ask Elaine any particular questions before we move on and let Ava start where she left off, if she can remember where that is. But any burning issues, a couple of things in the chat room. Well, first off, I'm curious to know, is everybody here on GuideStar? Is your village on GuideStar? Yeah, I mean, you need to be if you're not. But very good point. And I'm glad you brought that up, Elaine. Did you want to say something?
Yes. So the government will automatically put your 990s on GuideStar. All
Yeah,
you
and-
have to do is create an account and log in, and then you can look at any not-for-profit agency.
And it's good to go in and to claim your account and make sure that it's the description is current and applicable, so that you can own how you're being presented to the world, because there's usually a little paragraph. I haven't been on recently. And
yeah, we were behind for whatever reason. Our 990s were 2 years behind. I had no idea, and I went on there and saw it. It's good to check it out. Diane Watson had just a quick question about, you know, we say nonprofit, we say not for profit, and is there a difference? And I think that's just language, but there isn't any true difference, right, Elaine, that I know of?
I don't think so.
Yeah,
I use them interchangeably.
a 501c4 or C6 is not a charitable group, but they are nonprofit.
I guess we fall under 501c3, most of us, right? Would there be anybody else do anything differently? Well, again, we will have more time for questions in the breakout. It is 1:45, and I want to bring, thank you, Elaine. And we might even have 5 minutes for questions after Ava speaks, but Ava, I don't know when you came back on, but Elaine talked a lot about cost allocation, or she mentioned cost allocation. When you have to do a financial audit versus just a review, and monthly reconciliation, which I know you do, Ava. If you can talk a little bit about that throughout the things you're going to say here, because I think that's very important. Yeah.
I think where I first of all, I apologize profusely. The electricity went out. I saw flickering, but I didn't think anything of it until I got a note from, I guess I kept talking because I got a note from Mary Jo. But I apologize for that. That was very unexpected. I think where I left off, and then I came in and I heard Elaine speak about hiring a professional bookkeeper. It was very apparent that we needed to do that for a number of reasons. She immediately, because our volunteer treasurer did not have a financial background, and for many years, or for when I first started, there was a book behind me, and it was QuickBooks for Dummies. So she was completely self-taught, and she was doing it all on her own. And she did have oversight, absolutely, but she was creating all the correct reports and everything. So when we hired our professional bookkeeper, everything changed. As Elaine mentioned, we put everything immediately online in the cloud. So what that allowed us to do is it allowed me and our treasurer to have access to all of our transactions at all times. So that was the first big move we made into, because we were growing. And so the bookkeeper does the she does all transactions, she books, she codes, she does the financial reports monthly. Myself and our treasurer oversee her work, but we're in constant contact with her. She needs questions about why this on our credit cards, what was this charge? What was this? What's this check made out to? Everything is scanned, and the reason everything is scanned and put up now is because we did have to eventually hire an audit firm, and there was a couple of reasons for that. We were starting to get big grants, and some of the foundation money we were going after, they no longer were accepting just our 990 review. So we moved into a full-blown audit starting in 2019. My one dislike about it, of course, is the cost. The cost of an audit, even for small nonprofits, is between $9,000 and $12,000 a year. So you have to figure that into your budget every year. But it does allow us to really go after bigger fundraising grants. And that is one of the reasons we did it. Besides that, the government grant that I was in charge of at that time, I think it was required. And so we switched to an audit. And actually, it was, I think it's a good transparency. I mean, our audit's online. You can take a look at it and see exactly how our money is spent. And so in that regard, we have been doing it now for 5 years, and we've had all clean audits, and which that has absolutely helped us generate additional growth. The other aspect of our financial management structure that was drastically changed after that year was that big bequest. It was something very unexpected, and it was large enough where we had to hire a professional, an investment portfolio team to manage the money. And what they decided, what the board decided, a lot of times when nonprofits come into money like that, they will set up an endowment. We decided against that. The board thought, because it was unrestricted, that if we put it into investments, we could actually use the gains from whatever we earned on an annual basis and put it back into programming, which the donor actually wanted everything to programming, but she didn't want just one lump sum. So that is actually in our budget, that is one of the line items in income, is what we get from our portfolio investments. And so the corpus is still there because, you know, the financial markets have been doing so well in the past couple of years. So we've been applying it entirely back into our programming. So that portfolio management team, that was another part of our changed financial structure. And what it also allowed us to do, and this was very important to our board and our finance committee, is we drastically increased our reserve fund. We used to always, I think we had in our bylaws, we had to keep 3 months in our nonprofit for any kind of emergency, and we were able to increase it for a year's worth of expenses. So that sits in an interest yielding money market account, and it does cover any kind of emergency that would come about. I know this is a generational overview of our financial situation here at DuPont Circle Village, but what I would like to do is I'd be happy to answer any questions that touch on the various roles and all the coordination we have with the various teams that are involved. Like I said, we do have a bookkeeper who is, someone asked about the time spent. I had talked to her on Friday. She spends about 20 hours a week on our books, and that increases drastically during our audit. And she is key to gathering all the materials you need for an annual audit. So she said that at that time, it's 2 months. It's probably in April and May when she becomes crucial, and she spends most of her time just answering their questions. And it's always they just pick and choose on what they want you to describe. And it can be a long process, but you know, she's so organized and we have it down and we've been working with them for 5 years that that process has become pretty streamlined and we are done by June. And our 990 is posted on, you know, by I believe the early fall. And then the audit is of course available as well. And so I am free to answer any questions or anything that you want to ask me about.
Super. We will go ahead. We're going to take a break in about 5 minutes before we go into the breakouts, a break before the breakouts. Please do ask Ava any questions now if you have any.
Ava, I was just wondering, you said you had 260 members?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
I had a question. Can you give a breakout about how your budget, how much comes from your financial resources like this investment, and how much is from your dues, and that kind of a breakout? What comes from what?
Sure. For the membership dues, that has increased drastically. So we rely on membership dues only about less than 30%, about between 27 and 30%. We have 2 annual appeals every year. That brings in probably about 15%. And then our investments, the interest we've earned on our investments have been another third. And then the additional ones have been smaller grants. And then we do get a sizable city grant from the DC government that has been continuous now since 2017. You know, we started a legacy fund about 5 years ago when we got this first huge bequest. And that has also been added to the stream of our fundraising sources. But that is between 5 and 10% max every year. Someone wanted to give us some land, but actually we said no to it. It came with so many restrictions. Like we thought, oh great, let's just flip it. We were not allowed to do anything like that. So I mean, it's good that we have something in place where we do have people that people that I can actually ask regarding things like that would say, you know, we're not accepting just anything. What are we going to do with this? It becomes an albatross after a while. We have to pay taxes on it. And so we actually said no to a piece of property because of all the things that come along with it, all the restrictions.
Right. Yeah. Having a gift acceptance policy is very helpful in that regard. I see, Susan, you have your hand raised, and I see that there's a Susan that put something in the chat room. I don't know if you're the same Susans, but
yes, I am the same Susan.
Okay. Well, go ahead then and ask your question.
So my question is, we're a very small village with a very small budget, and I agree with the notion of QuickBooks Online and having someone else have access to it. That is one of the issues that we are addressing right now. I am the bookkeeper. I am a professional bookkeeper. I am the treasurer, and I use that for other clients. So my question is, what thresholds or how do you decide when it's, aside from the fact of multiple access, how do you decide when it's necessary to spend the monthly fee to go to QuickBooks Online? Because our budget is very small. That's my question.
I know that we pretty much had to go online because we had gotten so much bigger and our transactions were just multiplying. So I'm not really sure how to answer that. It was just necessary for us to do it, and we were willing to pay whatever it took, including hiring someone professionally to move us on to the cloud. It's very helpful. You must know that if you are already on there, because I can check up on things all the time when I'm curious about how money is being spent. And although our bookkeeper is, she's extremely efficient and organized, and I could actually just call her as well. But I just like having access to see what, how the budget, where things are being spent monthly.
And all of that is easily generated online.
Ross, do you want to weigh in on this? I mean, if you have a smaller budget and you have to decide how many people you really want to have going into QuickBooks, like, is it, yeah, go ahead, please.
Right. Well, we're actually, this has been a very enlightening conversation to me. I mean, particularly the panelist that was just between Ava and I, that I think she probably has a much better idea of what the tipping point is to go. But it seems to me, just listening to this, that it's something after listening to everybody talk that I'm going to start investigating as to whether it might be good just for us to put it. Because we have that issue with, you know, a review, I mean, who reviews what I do? I mean, it's not a lot of money, but still it's, you know, that access to information is really tough because, I mean, the stuff's on my computer and on our bookkeeper's computer. So it's something I think we're probably going to go to pretty quick in our village.
Okay, thank you. There are more questions in the chat. Some of them are a little bit more involved. I think they might be better suited in the breakout room, if that's okay. Jean, I see your question. Holly, you've got a lot of good questions.
I'd like to make a comment on Ross. I'd like to make a comment to Ross. As you detailed a lot of what you do, there's a lot of duplication and inefficiencies from what I see. I use QuickBooks. I'm a CPA, so I have a different level of background, but we're a very tiny village. But if you use QuickBooks, you can, it expedites paying bills and coding them and accumulating the information, and it's all done automatically. There's an upfront investment in time to set up on QuickBooks your books and your accounts, and it's important to think about what you want the output to be to do that effectively. But once you do that, once you put in the payable, basically it's mostly pushing buttons and you go all the way to a financial statement. So I wanted to encourage you to look at that, and it's very user friendly. You don't have to be an accountant to use it. What I would say is I don't know if they even sell Quicken anymore, but don't use Quicken. It's not a full set of books.
Yeah.
You must use QuickBooks.
Okay, Linda, you just gave me a great idea for a Wave session. A QuickBooks tutorial for village.
Oh, sure. Yeah, it would be.
And I just looked up TechSoup, and TechSoup's online. It says a year subscription is $160. So if you buy it through, but I quickly looked. So, and then you can buy packages on trainings on how to do it.
Very good. It's 11:02. I think this is probably a good time for a break. I'm not going to ignore the questions in the chat room, but we want to make sure we do cover those in the breakouts.